For a century, most Western governments have banned recreational drugs, other than alcohol and tobacco. But now there are signs of a change in perception. Might the use of some psychedelic drugs actually be beneficial? With me, first of all, is David Nutt, a distinguished psychopharmacologist, whose many work I've read, particularly his early stuff with Professor Glue. His latest book, Drugs Without the Hot Air, is an actually unflinching, very honest and very evidence-rich account of what we need to know about substances. Coming from a different angle, however, is Annemarie Ward. Now, Annemarie is the founder of a charity called FAVOR, which I understand stands for Faces and Voices of Recovery. Annemarie herself is no stranger to substances, and 22 years ago, when she managed to say no to them forever, she decided to start spreading the word about what we can do in society to do things a little more sensibly when it comes to trying to beat one's addictions. And then in the other corner, we have Dr. Peter Sjöstedt-H. He's an Anglo-Scandinavian philosopher who's got a particular interest in the works of Whitehead and of Nietzsche, and who also has an interest in fields of panpsychism and quite a few other ideas and interests besides.
The majority
David,
of people who use illegal drugs
David,
are using them to deal with problems. Well, I think firstly I would say that the concept of recreational drugs is that's almost the term recreation is almost stigmatizing in itself, because many of the drugs which people supposedly used as recreational drugs are used to treat suffering. The majority of people who use illegal drugs are using them to deal with problems of life. They're not actually having fun with them. So that's the first thing. The supposition it's all about hedonism is completely wrong. The second thing I would say is that the attempt to stop people using them is generally misguided, and it's usually driven by a theory that these drugs in the long term will lead to tolerance, dependence, and a greater harm. Unfortunately, for a number of so-called recreational drugs, particularly the psychedelics, that is completely false. In fact, these drugs do not cause tolerance or dependence. If anything, they're anti-addictive, and that's why they're being resurrected by my group and others now as potential therapies for disorders such as depression and addiction. But resurrecting drugs out of the holes they've been put into by the war on drugs, the intensely severe scheduling of these drugs makes it almost impossible for their true value in medicine to ever be realized. So there's a lot to say about it, and I think my own view is that many of these so-called recreational drugs are medicines which need to be liberated, not just to treat mental illness, but also disorders such as pain and potentially headaches as well.
Thank you, David. Annemarie, what's your pitch?
Sure, thanks very much, Mark. I don't think Professor Nutt and I are diametrically opposed at all. I think it's drug use isn't a single human experience, and it might be useful to consider it under three separate headings, such as problematic use and addiction, using drugs to cope with psychological or emotional and even physical pain, and three, recreational drug use. So going back to problematic drug use and addiction, which is where I have the most experience personally as a person in long-term recovery. Obviously that led and can lead to, for many people, a range of physical and mental health problems and obviously death. And it affects the lives of family, friends and the wider community in a negative way. So it does undermine the human experience without a doubt. But the second sort of area there, using drugs to cope with psychological and emotional and physical pain, well, this is a completely rational human response to the problem. Things like bereavement, relationship breakdowns are universal human experiences that are part of the natural cycle of life. And that's always going to be a way that human beings cope and work with whatever trauma is in front of them. But I would still argue that it does undermine the human experience, and that you're not getting to experience the depth of that pain. And three, recreational drug use, which is often justified on the grounds that it enhances the human experience, for sex, for socialising, for eating. There's a hedonistic neural response. And obviously after prolonged use and along with dependency, many would argue that these things are meant to be enjoyed in a natural state. So I don't think Professor Nutt and I are too diametrically opposed there. I think we would agree on a lot of areas.
Annemarie, thank you very much. Peter, over to you. What's your pitch?
Well, I generally think that so-called recreational drugs are beneficial in a number of ways. I mean, so I'm a philosopher, and I do, of course, see the medicinal value that David and Annemarie have spoken about. Of course, there are dangers there as well, such as patenting and taking away the total value of especially psychedelics from other benefits, such as, well, I'm a philosopher of mind, so for me, psychedelic drugs especially are very beneficial in terms of augmenting our phenomenological repository, as it were. So, you know, much of the study of the mind has been based on our prosaic forms of consciousness that we humans have evolved. But I think there's so much more to be discovered than that which we have even concepts for. So these drugs certainly benefit the academic study of that. They also benefit, of course, our understanding of this giant mystery that everyone's speaking about, really, at least in my world, which is the mind-matter mystery, how mind and matter relate. So psychedelics give us indications, new neural correlates of consciousness. I remember David Nutt once actually said that if you want to understand consciousness, you've got to study psychedelics. So these are perhaps pivotal in the general philosophic, psychological, medical, phenomenological mystery that is consciousness and matter. They also say a lot about, you know, very specific philosophical issues such as intentionality and access consciousness and so on. Also in terms of metaphysics, you know, the general big questions of the cosmos, I think, again, psychedelic drugs can offer so much. For example, one of the main philosophers in the Western canon, Spinoza, speaks about something he calls the intellectual love of God, and for him, God is nature, and it's this kind of unitive experience. It's a bit of a mystery to most readers, but perhaps psychedelics can offer a sort of empirical clue to what he means. You know, at the very least, there's a lot of interesting metaphysical, logical work to be done there. I think also with regard to Whitehead's process philosophy, am I going over 3 minutes? Sorry.
Well, David, yes, I think you're heading in that direction.
Okay.
So, yeah, let's just wind up there, because I'm sure you'll find many chances to insert any other points of view that you have. So let's, if we may, just press on to the first issue of the debate. I want us to first consider this question. Do drugs actually undermine our well-being as human beings? Do they take something away from our existence? Now, we know that a lot of people, Aldous Huxley, for example, have argued very passionately in favour of the enhancing effect of drugs, and alcohol kind of speaks for itself in terms of its ubiquity of use. But I wonder, Peter, could I ask you what you think the advantages might be?
Of well-being?
For drugs, recreationally, for our well-being as a race.
Well, I think, the first thing I'd say, qualify that question with is, what we mean by well-being, because this might differ through culture and through time. But let's just take a general sort of consensus that is, you know, Western European today. There's a lot of, the other two will know more about this than I do, but there's a lot of evidence showing that psychedelics, again, psilocybin, for example, can treat depression. There's a trial going on, which has been approved officially at the moment. So in that sense, I think MDMA for PTSD is being researched at the moment, and ketamine and so on. There's a lot of medical benefits to it. I think in terms generally, I always see psychedelics as almost like another facet to life. So we can appreciate music, one can appreciate fine foods, one can appreciate the landscape, the open ocean, or whatever. I think psychedelics are analogous to that. They give another facet to the enrichment of life. And for someone who has never had such an experience, such a heavy psychedelic experience, to me, it's a bit like a person missing out on the joy of music or something like that. So in terms of well-being, that alone, I think, is pointed towards their benefits.
Annemarie, what do you make of that?
Well, I'm reflecting on my own experience of psychedelics, really, and I had a very positive experience with psychedelics as a young woman.
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below, or visit iai.tv for more debates and talks from the world's leading thinkers on today's biggest ideas.